Joining me in the studio is Sir Iain Duncan Smith, Tory MP for Chingford and Woodford Green, former Conservative Party leader and co-founder and director of the Centre for Social Justice think tank, which is what you're in to talk to me about. First of all, Sir Iain, lovely to see you this morning. Thank you. Now, this report, this seminal report that the CSJ has released called Two Nations is on the front page of the Sunday Times. It's on the front page of the Sunday Telegraph. It's got great coverage. The headlines, though, are very stark. COVID turned UK social divide into a chasm, says the Sunday Times. The Telegraph headline is "Lockdown had catastrophic effect on poverty gap." So what does this report tell us about Britain, Sir Iain?
Well, what it is very clear about is that the problems that have existed for a long time, which may even begun to be put right before COVID, but there are big gaps in society. You know, the poorest in society are bottom 2 or 3 deciles, whose work is non-progressive quite often, who now feel it's better to be on welfare than it is to be back at work. Huge increases in sickness benefit claims, and yet in those claims, 700,000 people in a recent study we did want to go back to work, but they're fearful about how they get back to work. So there's been a big divide, but then COVID hit. And this is the big point about the report, which is, as I say, done by independent people like Martin Ivans, even the ex-governor of the Bank of England, Irvin King, and even the Greater Manchester Mayor, Andy Burnham.
Yes.
So it's cross-party
The
spectrum. And what this tells us is that nobody thought about what would happen when you try and shut an economy down, blanket shut down, about those who can't be shut down.
Yes.
So if you're, for example, a single mother living in a 12th story of a tower block with 2 kids, you have to go to work, often to do the books at Amazon that the middle classes were then reading happily in their gardens. They had to go to work, but the mayor shut the tubes down to a degree, so they were packed.
Yes.
And their kids were now off school. The group that was least likely to catch COVID were being locked out of school. So now that mother is having to juggle the idea her kids are at school without the right facilities to go online and has to go to work to earn an income. No wonder then eventually she bails out. There are big mental health problems for the kids, and that's growing exponentially.
Yes, to use a word.
Exactly right, but they're in the schools. And then, following that, we've now got huge increase in ghost children. That is children that never came back to school after the lockdown. The government's trying to do stuff about it, but the lockdown literally drove them out of their schools. And these are kids in the poorest environment. They need the education. That's the best way out of poverty, but they're not there. Going into street gangs, big problems. This report, in specific terms, shows all of these features increase dramatically coming through the lockdowns. And the question, you know, it's a very good report because it gives an idea and we're going to put policy forward. But the second part of it is, what in heaven's name is this inquiry doing at the moment?
That's right.
This is the issue that we should really be dealing with. Did anybody think seriously? What are the scientists that told us we had to lock down a blanket of dodgy forecasts, but were all wrong? We panicked. I can understand right at the beginning, but 2 more lockdowns and the schools was a disaster for this country, and we are still picking up the pieces. It's divided society dramatically. That's what the report says.
Yes.
And now the big focus has to be how you put that right.
I mean, the report is discovering things that the COVID inquiry should look at. Instead, the COVID inquiry seems to be concerned with what Dominic Cummings said to Matt Hancock and what Boris Johnson thought about it. Is the COVID inquiry in its current form fit for purpose?
Well, I'm astonished, you know, that what's been going on for a year and a half with this inquiry, I must say, because all along at the CSJ, we've been asking this question: what about the poorest in society? Who asked about them? Who's looking at what they're doing? Which is why this report has been produced. We're going to come forward with what has to be done, because things do have to be done. But lots of stuff happened in the period. I can understand that we've never been in this situation before, huge pressures. But once we began to understand who this affected, it didn't affect young people. It didn't affect children. It was about comorbidities and older people. Well, then you set your policy accordingly to deal with that. But what we carried on doing was these blanket lockdowns under the punishing direction from many of the scientists who considered this is absolutely the case, we had to do it. Hospitals were half empty, by the way. People having cancer treatment couldn't get into the hospitals, yet there were empty beds there because they were worried about COVID.
That's all
real
things that the
issue.
inquiry
So
should look
this
at.
inquiry that we've carried through is all about what went wrong and how bad is it now in society? And it is definitely very divided.
Before we get on to the government and indeed the Tory party's problems, one last question on that, because there's a stark line in the report. It's 300 pages long. I do recommend people look at it because it's so comprehensive. It's what the inquiry should be doing and isn't doing. But there's a line in there about, Britain is sick, but being sick pays. And you were the architect of universal credit as the Secretary of State for the Department for Work and Pensions. It must depress you to find in your own think tank's report this idea that people are feeling better off on welfare than in work. We know that there are some people who simply cannot work. They are either disabled, they have got circumstances beyond their control, they might be caring for an ill child, an ill parent, and all the rest of it. But this statistic of people who could work but choose not to must depress you particularly.
It does. Universal credit's done a huge amount to get people back to work, and it was working really, really well as we ran to COVID. The problem is once you take off all the restrictions, all the conditionality, etc., which happened, then people will drift, as they did, towards those elements. One of the biggest problems they've got, of course, is most of the sickness benefit elements are not in universal credit.
Yeah.
So many of the long-term sick are still now outside of any of that support or assistance that would come if they were in universal credit. The second part about this is, on the disability front, the government actually had got a good record, more people in work who had disabilities. But one of the polls that we did in a run to this was to ask the question, how many of those who are on sickness benefit actually genuinely want to work? So over 700,000 said we would want to work, but were scared stiff about how it goes about, whether or not we get prosecuted, what happens next. So the complexity has also now trapped them. We want them out of that, and all of that sickness benefit should be in universal credit right now. There shouldn't be people languishing outside the support and help that you can get to get them back to work, to deal with their conditions, to help get the remedial treatment that is necessary. That is critical, and that has to be done.
So you're going to be making policy recommendations to the government, which hopefully they will listen to on the back of this report. Let's just talk about the Rwanda plan, can we? Because you've been linked to this star chamber of lawyers. Your colleague in the House, Sybil Cash, is among those people saying that they don't think this legislation is robust enough. We've had Michael Gove on with me this morning saying that it is gold-top Jersey milk proof legislation. That's how robust he thinks it is. He thinks it's a top-level bill that won't, sort of let through any seepage, so to speak. What's your view, and how are you going to vote on Tuesday?
Well, I've said all along, I just wait to see what the lawyers come up with in terms of how they interpret this.
I mean they're saying that it's not foolproof. Well,
I don't know, because my view at the moment is there are good bits in it, and the government has moved a long way to try and head off what I call vexatious, constant court cases. So there's good stuff in it, and it's a good attempt to do this. The question is whether, on the margins, that brings the exact results or unexpected consequences. And so I've held my own counsel.
So you can't tell me today that you're going to vote with the government?
Because I said I want to see what the final report of these lawyers is, people I respect, by the way, like Martin Howe and Bill Cash, etc., on constitutional work and European work. The key question is, have we done enough? Now, Lord Sumption thinks they have. So it'd be interesting to see what the juxtaposition of that with the Lord Sumption's is. And so most of my colleagues, it's not for me to tell them what to do. I just simply recommend don't leap before you see exactly what it is in front of you.
But that sounds to me that you might be veering towards abstention if you're not happy, rather than rebellion. I mean, the government is on the ropes. It's not going to be helpful for people like you, senior politicians in the party, a former leader, to rebel on this, is it?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, which is why I'm keeping my counsel on this. And my view is you can't always have perfection, but the question is, have you gone far enough to make sure that essentially you're able to do what the public wants, which is to get these flights off the ground to Rwanda. That's the key test, with people on it that disincentivises those who are paying huge sums of money and risking their lives. But do you think you're going to see a flight depart from this country to Rwanda between now and the next general election? I think we have to.
But do you think it's credible?
I think it is wholly feasible for that to happen.
Because Jenrick's opinion seems to be, they're doing this all for show and they're not really being real about it, and it's kind of electioneering rather than actually going to make a difference.
My general view to everybody of my colleagues is speak softly and carry a big stick. The truth is, we do a lot of shouting at the moment, and I wish we'd stop shouting and just literally discuss these things in a reasonable way, because at the end of it all, we have one purpose, all of us, which is we want to get these flights off, because they will discourage those paying huge monies and being literally likely to die out in the Channel. That has to stop.
Yes.
It would be really good if we made sure that, as far as we possibly can, that is achievable. That is surely the only thing that matters.